Hello and welcome to Adapt with Danette FM. My name is Danette Menzies and we are in season 3 of this podcast. Today we're going to be talking about experimentation and very sadly it's our last episode for this season. Super excited about next season. Have loved these conversations about experimentation, and today we're going to be talking to David Fish, or Fishy as we like to call him. But first I would like to welcome into our conversation Jez FM, or Jez Fenton Menzies, my executive producer and co-host on the Adapt with Danette FM podcast. Jez, how are you today?
I'm great. And I agree. It's sad. It's the end of a season, but that just means another season is in store. But I think it's a great time for us to be wrapping up this season on experimentation in a world that is sort of feeling chaotic. But I think as we're going to find through today's conversation, perhaps that could be a great time to be experimental. But before we get to that, Danette, for people that don't know, this is the companion podcast to the awesome book, The Adaptable Leader by Danette Fenton Menzies, right here on this podcast, where you talk about adaptability. And in a world that's constantly changing, what's a more important skill than remaining adaptable? So we've made this podcast to extend the book a little bit and to help people remain adaptable in a world that's ever changing. And so you can listen this season to listen to Experimentation, which is our theme, which is part of your accepts model, which people can learn more about in the book. All of this is in service of keeping everybody adaptable. And this season, we're really focusing on adaptability and experimentation. And we're going to be talking to a friend of the show, David Fish, who we've had on the Magical Learning podcast, which people can go check out. But he's a fantastic guest and a great conversation you had with him here today, Danette.
Yes, yeah, super excited for this conversation. But geez, should we look at the news first?
You know what, Danette? Let's absolutely do that. Let's jump into, for the final time this season, Adapt the News. Alrighty, everybody, this is Adapt the News. This is where we take a news story from around the world. We look through your lens of adaptability, Danette, and we see what you're seeing about the adaptability of this story. We head over to one of our favorite places to get news, positive.news. And today we're going to be talking about something that is going to be a bit of a trend, I think, going forward. It's about adaptability. It's about old ways kind of blending with new ways. It's an article written by Tom Pattinson, and the headline is How a 1930s House Turned into a Carbon Negative Home. Now, what this article is really talking about, it's set in Britain, but what it's really talking about is how there's a lot of old houses that, maybe they leak a bit of heat. They're not really built for a sort of carbon negative future. However, people are starting to retrofit and create a bit of an industry around preserving some of the good elements of these old houses, but giving them some modern solutions to old problems. Now, Danette, I think this is a great way to sort of round out this season because it's talking about remaining adaptable. It's talking about using what you've already got in a lot of ways, but also it's an experience that you yourself has sort of done a little bit with the house that you're in recording from right now. We are in different cities, but this house was built long before Wi-Fi. So do you want to tell us a little bit about what this article meant to you and a little bit about your own experience?
Yeah, Jez, I love this article. So this house was invented before electricity was connected, like many, many years. So my grandfather built the house we live in. In 2028, it will be 100 years old. And when he built the house, he basically, because there was no electricity, etc., he had a tank in the roof which gravity fed water into the house. Electricity came when my mum was, I think, a teenager. So it was some time before the house actually had electricity. So he built it so it was solar passive, which is really interesting when you think that was nearly 100 years ago that he was able to do that. He used a lot of natural materials. And what I love about this article is it's like, okay, we don't need to get rid of old things. We can actually retrofit them and adapt them to later innovation and experiments that have worked. And so for me, it gave me a lot of hope because I've been thinking, okay, well, how do I do different things? Because I don't want to knock down this house. I totally love this house that my grandfather built. And you can't, it's unique. That's the lovely thing. So for me, watching what they were doing with things like heat pumps and stuff like that, solar we've already got here, and our water comes out of the sky. So we have a tank that pumps fresh rainwater into the house. So I think you're again being adaptable, and wherever you are, it's working out what works for you. So some people, they won't have the option to own an older house. They'll buy a new house, and that's totally okay. Adapt with what works for you, and know that we don't necessarily have to get rid of things because they're a bit older, a bit like people. We can adapt and move forward. So I really love that they're starting to think, yes, it might cost a little bit more, or the investment up front might be a little bit more, but the long-term returns can be astonishing. And I think this house, my grandfather died when I was 3, so that's well and truly nearly 60 years later. Very little work has been done on this place. So he built it to a quality that, is extraordinary. And so to be able to sustain that through some modifications, super awesome from my perspective. So really loved this particular story, Jess. Thanks for choosing it.
Yeah. And, I think the thing that it also, beyond just being connected to, obviously, you and where you're literally recording this podcast from, as you mentioned, it's almost a 100-year-old house, and there's a video podcast being recorded from it in 2026. So, I bet that wasn't probably in your grandfather's mind when he was building this house. But I think the thing that I took away from the article is that this is going to become a more common practice, because as we have a lot of good old things and especially in modern times where some things can feel a little flimsier than they used to be made. When you have something that's old, the refurbishment sometimes can be the cheaper option than buying a new one. And I think when you've got old stuff that's still strong, it's going to be about refurbishing that, because that's going to be the good quality stuff. So I think that it's something that we're seeing in this article, but I think it's going to become very common going forward. So I just thought it's a bit of a trend, and that's going to help us remain adaptable. If that's something that you're thinking about, you might want to get into, help people keep old homes, but bring some modern conveniences to them. Maybe that's also an industry.
Yes, love it, Jess.
Awesome. Well, Danette, our final guest for the season of Experimentation, I couldn't think of someone better, was David Fishy. He's a friend of the show. We love having him on, and he's always a great conversation. Did you have any sort of things that you wanted our listeners and viewers to keep their eyes open for in this conversation?
So much. There were so many good takeaways from this particular conversation. I loved the mindset that he brought, which is always looking at what's working, what's not working, and experimenting. So just making experimentation part of what we do. And he shared a couple of insights and good models that could be helpful. So he talked about where we allocate our funds. So the 70, the 20, and the 10%. I'll leave that for listeners and viewers to learn more about. He had 3 great questions that he used to get feedback around experimentation. And basically, I like this bit, and I'm reading this because it's a bit of a tongue twister. We should expect it to be unexpected before it's unexpected. So really we're expecting the unexpected before it becomes unexpected. So we're planning for the world to change and us to have plans around what might not be working now, and then to be able to experiment around them. And he used that in relation to his flying, because he flies as well. So there are a couple of things. I'll talk more at the end about some of the other takeaways, but just a fabulous conversation around experimentation.
Absolutely. Well, I think without further ado, Danette, let's throw to our final interview for the season with David Fish.
Super excited because we are on season 3 where we're talking about experimentation. And today I have a dear friend, David Fish, who we love to call Fishy, and we're going to be having a great conversation around experimentation. So Fishy, I'd love for you just to give our listeners and viewers a brief bio on yourself, please.
The briefest of bios. So we've connected through a business school. We both run our own practices. Mine's strategic focused, with my passion being around how we connect through how we show up in the world. So how companies show up in the world, how ideas show up in the world and get purchased, and how we show up in the world. So how we form our presence, our leadership presence. I'm going to avoid saying personal branding because I hate it for all that it's become. I'm very anti that space, not because we shouldn't have a personal brand, but because of what that's become, because that's not presence. So how we connect connect is part of my world, and that's come from, let's call it 30 years in advertising and 50 years in life of trying to figure those two things out that now come together in the work I do.
Nice. Great intro. And so Fishy, let's sort of start with, I'm curious about how would you define, given your background, your experience, experimentation, particularly in terms of what it could look like for leadership, but also organizations?
It's great question. I think when I think about experimentation, I also go to exploration and I put them together, but I'll define where I think they're different. And I think about it as if you don't go there, you'll never know, or will you ever know? And that's why I like both of these, because I'm wired to want to know how things work. And I think to find out how things work, you have to find the edges where they don't work. So, and I think this is true of me as a person, but it's true of leaders, it's true of organizations. The difference, though, between experimentation and exploration is control. So when we want to know if something is working or not, and we make some changes, if we don't have controls in place, how will we know if the things we changed made a difference or not? And so that control piece, I think, is the difference in kind of wandering through a forest and trying to find a stream or a beautiful view, as opposed to bringing experimentation into business. And so at the heart of that for me is a question, which is, how do you know? It's kind of like a high performance mindset question, which is this desire to keep working on what's working and what's not. And I think as a leader, anywhere in an organization, so leader is not just a C-suite role, to have that mindset of, as a person, what's working, what's not for me, as an organization, what's working in my team, what's working, what's not, and then being prepared to adapt, which is then to play with that. That for me is kind of where I go to when I think about experimentation and its relationship with exploration.
Love both. And I'd not really thought about the exploration side before, but I love that bit about the controls too. So then that leads me to, is there an example you have where you saw experimentation worked really well? And so what were the reasons behind that?
If I think about it, sort of the times experimenting works, it's when there are these controls in place and we've got a measure, but we're taking a risk and we're being prepared to fail in taking that risk. But we've also got a control that says, I'm not putting the organization at risk. So one of the formats we use in advertising with clients' money, was 70-20-10. 70% goes on what you know works. So you're safe, the safe bets. 20% goes on stuff that could be interesting to test, and 10% is the wild card. And you go completely crazy with 10% of the budget. So you got $1 million, that's a decent amount of money, but you're not risking the $1 million on a bet. You're not going to the casino and putting it on 0 or 000 or 00. You're going, you know what, I'm not going to gamble my entire budget on a bet. I'm going to bet 10%. And I'm going to put 70 on the safe bets. And that's how we learn. It's how we adapt. It's how you go from everyone running 30-second spots to knowing that you could run a 15 or you could run a 60, you could run a 5 on Facebook, and why it works. And I think the thing with experimentation and why I love it so much is that when we don't experiment, then we get stuck in our comfort zone. And for me, comfort is the enemy of great. So if we're not, it's kind of like when you're comfortable, it's time to experiment. It's kind of the other way to think about it. It's like comfort is the warning sign that says it's time to mess with some things. And so that for me is when I've seen it work best. It works for me in flying. So that thing up there behind me is the aerobatic plane I fly competitions in. You don't win competitions in your comfort zone. You win competitions by experimenting to find the very, very edge of performance, which is where peak performance is and where you win. And if you don't keep pushing to find that edge, you'll fly maybe 2% back from the edge, maybe 5% back from the edge, where you don't win competitions by being 5% from the edge. And so that experimentation is critical to getting to that place. And then in the business today, I use it with, when I'm developing keynotes, I have a very simple view of the world when it comes to keynotes. It's kind of I call it my comedy club approach. If someone's paying me, I'm going on a stage, I've got a headset microphone on, that keynote is polished, it's well rehearsed, it's well prepared, it's content I know, it's not trial content, it's not experimentation. If I'm doing a keynote where I'm not being paid, it's my comedy club moment, I'm going to test new material. And it's that 70-20-10 again. I'm going to keep 70% as core. I might have a story I haven't told before that I'm going to test with an audience to see how it goes down and see if I can deliver it. So that it's not just on my response with the audience. It's like, can I deliver that story? Am I ready to tell that story on a stage? And 10% will be something I've never done before. So it's that outlier. And even in a comedy club moment, so it might be a small audience, it could be a large audience, but the risk is we're kind of taking a shared risk because I'm not being paid to do the keynote. So the stakes are a little bit lower. So that's how I'm prepared to allow some things to fail. But I'm not risking it all. I'm not taking 100% new content onto a stage. I'm taking 70%, which I'm comfortable in. I'm playing around the edges. But when I play with that 20 and that 10, whatever that is, could be a joke, it could be an opening that's different, it could be an ending that's different, it could be a model that I try that I haven't tried before, or some kind of workshop exercise in a keynote, which can sometimes really fall flat. I'm testing something to see how does this work and where do I want to take this in the future? And I'm doing it again with that control. I'm not changing everything, but I am being prepared to fail.
So then that's got me thinking that after you've done that, let's call it the comedy club approach, how do you then just go back and look at that to work out whether it worked, it didn't, what's your process after that event?
Keynotes are wonderful because you kind of, there's two things One is how you delivered it instantly. It comes through you, or you struggle, or you trip over words, or you can't remember certain things. So you kind of get an intrinsic feeling of that worked or that didn't. And you also get an immediate response. So you see how the audience responds. Do you get the dog where you ask, if you speak to your dog and they're not sure what you say, they do this head. If an audience doing that head, it means I don't understand. So it might be completely clear. It's the curse of knowledge is the science behind it. It might be completely clear to us. I might be reveling in the research that I'm trying to land on stage, and I know it really well because I've read all 900 pages of it twice. Or it's an area I've worked with for 20 years, and the audience is giving me that face. Then I know it's not landing. So there's this kind of beautiful thing about keynotes, which you don't get when you change website copy or advertising copy or change campaigns and things that we do, where we don't get that immediacy, that you can kind of feel it. You feel it yourself, and then you get a response from the audience. And then depending on the situation, I'll often do my 3 favorite questions, which is kind of my simple research follow-up, which is what did you love? What would you change? And what could I do differently? And so those 3 things, if I need that kind of more concrete direction. But to be honest, most of the time, I know what I'm changing. I have an expectation of what I'm expecting. So what my response, the reason I'm changing it and what I'm looking to get from the audience, shock or engagement, participation. There's a thing I'm playing with. And then and also, again, me. So testing, is this content something that I'm going to be able to deliver? Can I pull it off? It might be an emotional story. It might be a story where I'm being more vulnerable than I've been before on stage. There's a whole bunch of things that you can test in that environment. And so I'm looking at, did I deliver it? Did they respond the way I expected? Do I want to do this again? And I think most of the time you kind of walk off going, yeah, good, yeah, nah.
I love that. And I love the intentionality too around that. So thank you for sharing that process. Then my next question is sort of the flip of that. What have you seen in terms of challenges when people have been experimenting? And again, it can be yourself as well. And why didn't it quite work?
I think fear of failure is the first. So not giving it a go, not letting it play out. So either being afraid of failure and therefore not doing it. Failure is part of experimentation because it's an experiment. We don't know what the outcome's going to be. And therefore, I actually think the idea of calling things experiments allows you to have that openness to the answer being directional as opposed to right or wrong, in terms of you can soften the failure a little bit. And sometimes there's early signs of failure and people will pull back, whereas actually you just got to let it go. You've got to give it some time. Not having controls in place, so which goes in part with changing too many things at once. So if you change 6 variables, well, how do you know which of the 6 was the variable that changed? And therefore you've just created confusion. It's just an overwhelming experiment. And the other one I've seen this was in a very large organization. I won't say who on this occasion. I sometimes do name and shame, but this one I won't. But they did an experiment with rolling out an agile working practice. and they put it into a very specific part of the business, which was slow to respond to innovation, and it was a phenomenal success. And they went from a small scale experiment, well, let's call it with 100 people, and there were 3 very distinct aspects of why this experiment worked. So really clear outcomes as to how this was driving speed to market, innovation, unlocking growth opportunities within this 100 people. And they went straight from that to, let's call it 20,000 people. And there's probably 6 or 7 steps of like other experiments between that. And so the scaling failed relatively spectacularly, not because the original experiment was wrong, but because the steps were missed to control the rollout and just assume that this thing could scale so dramatically. And so I think that they're the times where it doesn't work. You've got to have a little bit of openness to failure, be controlled in the controls. So, there's this tendency. You take a simple example, like, you go, okay, are my leadership team meetings as effective as they could be? What if I change the date? What if I change the agenda? What if I changed how long they run for? What if I changed who comes to them? Well, change one of those things at once. And over 2 months, you could experiment with lots of different formats to go, actually, a leadership meeting 8:30 on a Wednesday with these people with that agenda is the most effective one. But if you change all of those variables in the first week, you'll never know. Was it because Brian and Mary didn't come, or was it because the new agenda was better? Don't know. So that's where I see it going wrong.
Nice. And I love that, even with meetings, which are a really simple thing in organizations, a great way to start that foundation of experimenting in an organization, because most people, if you ask them about meetings, they're not loving them.
That's it. Yeah, and it is the little things, right? It doesn't have to be, how do I create an agile way of working or win aerobatic competitions, like passion points. But yeah, it can be tiny little things, and we'll get onto some of the more human aspects of this a little bit later on, I think.
I love that. Love it. So then my next question was, how do we encourage more experimentation at work?
I think the first is make it okay to fail. So having scenarios where safety is assured, which is you're not going to get fired. That's the safety that most people are concerned about, particularly at the moment, so that failure and safety can coexist. When we fear that failure is going to have a negative consequence on our future promotion or our existence in our job or on this planet, then we won't go there. Finding things like the 70-20-10. So what the 70-20-10 does is give permission to play in the 20 and the 10, with the 10 being extreme. And so you're not putting the organization at risk. People are empowered to play at the edges with controls. And so you don't have to have a handbook, because this is the other thing I think is you get the experimental, let's build a skunk works where we experiment and we're going to put it in a separate building, and then you can go and work there for 2 months, and then you sign this document and here's the rules of engagement. You're like, you know what? I'd rather just poke my pen in the eye. I haven't got time to read the rules of engagement. I just want to go and break some things. So the 70-20-10 is just super simple, right? 70, don't break this. 20, meddle a little bit. 10, go for your life. Right? There's so much, there's very limited damage you can do to the organization where only 10% is being put at risk. Now, obviously, if that's social media posts you're putting out in the world, you will need some controls. But don't overdo the controls, because controls by nature of the control says we're limiting the amount you can experiment. So try and create some freedom that allows that safety to thrive.
Let's talk a little bit more about the social side, because I'm really curious about your thoughts around that.
In terms of the human aspects of this.
Of just experimenting and what can we do to support more people being engaged in this whole process?
I think it is that there's this that failure has a stigma because it says something went wrong, and often failure is associated with negative consequences, right? So if you're standing up a project in a work environment, you want that project to be successful. And we don't think about, what if 2 things fail and 2 things are successful, the 2 learnings fuel future growth. We go, or bury the 2 that weren't successful and just talk about the 2 that were. And we go, this project was a great success because of A and B. And you see it quite a lot, and you see this now in social media, the perfect people, everything in life is good, perfect pet, perfect holidays, perfect children, perfect car, and it's not believable. And so there's a little bit around in the social side of how we connect around humility, but a lot of this comes back to, in project terms, it's the fear of failure and the associated risks where we haven't made that safe for people to play in that environment. And again, going back to aerobatics, we go to a place in learning to compete where you know you're going to fail, i.e. the aeroplane is going to get to a point where it is no longer flying. But you don't do that for the first time at 5 feet off the ground. You do it at 5,000 feet off the ground. So you create a control that allows failure to exist in a place where it's not going to create harm, knowing that you're going to fail. So knowing that you're going to do things that put you in a situation which at other times could be life-threatening. And that, again, is the safety controls within the business that says it's okay to fail in this way. In fact, we're encouraging you to fail. In fact, we want you to go out there and do 5 things, knowing 4 of them aren't going to work. And out of the 4, we'll make the one that did work better. And that's the sort of iterative mindset that I think stops us as individuals and stops organizations and groups of people going into this place of playing. Basically, it's this painful mindset of, I'm going to keep building the tower of Lego bricks until it falls over, and I'm going to figure out how I can make the tower go taller and not fall over, as opposed to just going, if I stop here, I know it won't fall over, because that's comfort zone territory. But we're kind of conditioned to want to play there.
So then I'm really curious about when, you get up to say 5,000 feet and you're experimenting and, the plane stalls for argument's sake, or does a nosedive, or those, and it may not have been planned.
Mm-hmm.
You've obviously got a process that keeps your head, calm and stuff. And I reckon that's possibly one area where leaders sometimes don't know how to handle when it's not going according to plan.
Yep.
So love, Fishy, if you wouldn't mind sharing what you do to keep control in a situation that is unexpected.
Expect it to be unexpected before it's unexpected. So we call it threat and error management in flying, which is think about what the threats and the errors are and the consequences of those before you're there. So when we put ourselves in a unexpected situation, we have a startle effect, which can be multiple seconds or minutes while we're trying to figure out what's going on, and that can be quite detrimental. And so you have a plan for what you expect to go wrong, as much as a plan for what you expect to go right. And so that when it does go wrong, you're half expecting it because it's part of your threat and error management. So cybersecurity is a hot topic right now. The time to figure out who to call when there's a hack is not when there's a hack. It's now when you do the offsite, and this is what I say about, I was having this conversation last week. We go and run these offsites and strategic away days, and I get asked to facilitate, and then people turn up with all their PowerPoint presentations. And I'm like, what a waste of time. Let's talk about the stuff that we could be talking about away from the day-to-day of the business. Like, what are you going to do when you get hacked? What are you going to do when X happens? What are you going to do when the working from home policy isn't working and half the team want to resign because they don't want to work from the office 4 days a week and you want them to? Like, what are you going to do when that threat or error occurs? Now, while we're calm, we're collected, we've got Mentos in a bowl, we've got a beautiful view, it's a lovely air-conditioned room. Let's discuss it now and figure out the plan, or at least the scenarios, before we're in the scenario. The time to figure out how to fly an aeroplane that's upside down and literally is spinning inverted is not when you're upside down spinning inverted. It's not a great time to try to find the flight manual or Google how to get out of a flat spin, or try and remember what Tom Cruise did in Top Gun. The time to figure that out is before you get in the aeroplane. And so if you know you're putting yourself at risk, and we do this every day in business as leaders, we're constantly putting ourselves and our businesses at risk by doing things that we do. Well, at the same time, we should be thinking about the control, not the controls, but the response when we get into a situation that is unexpected.
Great answer. Thank you for sharing that too. So then, my next question is, why is it important for leaders and organizations to encourage experimentation if they want to adapt?
I think it's the only way to adapt. Because if you don't experiment, then how do you know what to change and how do you know what's working and what's not? You're back in this comfort zone, right? So the comfort zone's lovely. but nothing good comes from it. Like innovation doesn't come from staying where everything's working perfectly. And the problem with not adapting is that the world is. And so if we're in our lovely little comfort zone and all things are working and all the little indicators on your dashboard are green and everything's good, right? Profit's good, margins are good, cash flow's good, sales revenue's good, staff are happy. It's called a moment in time. Some of that's going to go to shit at some point. And so if we just stay in the comfort zone, when that starts to erode, well, we don't know what to do. And so the constant adaptation and kind of being uncomfortable with that and go, okay, everything's green. What's next? Because the market's moving, customers are moving, society's moving, social attitudes are changing. If we're staying still in a world that's dynamic, we're either incredibly lucky and we've built something really amazing. Maybe there are unicorns that can happen for. We've got caught in a beautiful trend and it's working for us. Or we're just enjoying the moment in the comfort zone. It's all about to go to shit and we're going to be scrambling for 6 months after that. So I think this idea of, I used to say to people when I used to run teams, large teams, I used to talk about structure as we're nearly there. So I used to talk about recruitment and building structures, and I love doing restructures. Did a few too many. But I used to say we're nearly there. Like we're just hiring, we'll just move this here. And I realized one day it was completely stupid because structures are never there. The structure of an organization, however big you are, 5 people, 50 people, 500 people, 10,000 people, if the structure's finished, then the business is finished. Because the world is changing, the skill sets needed are changing, the dynamics of the market are changing, the way we service customers changes. So a structure of a business, like its marketing, its messaging, particularly messaging at the moment, super hot topic for me at the moment because I think we have to just be so on messaging right now. It's constantly adapting. So if my mindset as a leader is I'm getting to a place where it's finished, then I'm not thinking about constant change and experimentation and go, okay, well, what if I split that division in 2 and move those people up? Okay, that didn't work because half of those people left. That was bad. Cool. Okay, don't do that again. Like that mindset of there isn't an end point to an organizational structure. There's a moment in time point, and there were beautiful moments in time where we recruited everybody. Everyone was happy. Everything was working, and you just hold it and go, that's not going to last. What's coming next? How am I going to prepare myself? What have I done in the past that might serve me in the future? And what do I need to be thinking about next that's going to take me through when this changes again? And so that, to me, adaptation, it's back to that comfort zone. When things are really comfortable, I get really nervous.
I love that because that's sort of predicting that I always, we need to continuously adapt. And what I loved about your last answer is there was lots and lots of questions. So you didn't assume you knew what was coming or anything. You kept asking questions to keep your brain open to the idea of experimenting and adapting. So I love that approach.
Yeah, it's kind of the same with vision, right? If you as a leader, you need to have a vision. You need to set a direction that people want to follow you to go to a place in the future. And vision should be stretching. So it shouldn't be somewhere we can get to in 6 months or 12 months. It should be 3 to 5 years. Not many people think about 5 years anymore, but let's just pretend. And the thing with the vision is we're not there and it's stretching. And both of those things say we don't know how to get there. So if we're going to colonize Mars or build rockets that can take people to Mars, which is a planet so far away we don't know how to get there, then we have to experiment. So we have to adapt and we have to learn and we have to ask questions and we have to do things that don't work. We have to make rockets that blow up and then make a better rocket that doesn't blow up and then find some fuel that takes the rocket further. And that's progress towards a vision. If we have a vision and we know how to get there, it's not a vision, it's a goal. It's a step towards something bigger, but we haven't set a stretching vision. So part of leadership is to set a direction to a place that we don't know how to get to. Therefore, we have to ask questions and explore and experiment and take risks to figure out how to get there. So it's kind of that. Again, if you've arrived at a place where you've colonized Mars, and we've got little happy homes on Mars, and we've built a rocket that can get there and ideally can get us back, then you have to go, well, what's next? Because that vision's done. So I'm back in comfort zone again. So now where do we go? Okay, we've done the moon, done Mars. What about Saturn? Like there has to, that's how we're wired as humans. We want progress. We have imagination. And so there's a kind of ecosystem. We could probably draw a Venn diagram between us that would make this work, between vision, innovation, progress that we're wired for, and this need to keep adapting.
I love that. And then we've got organizations, and I definitely see this often. The bigger they get, the harder it is for, that movement, because there's lots of rules, there's lots of structure and stuff. And, part of our brain, we love certainty. So you're going to have people who don't necessarily feel at all comfortable with this idea of experimenting and stuff. So how do we balance that in an organization where, it might be, it's been around for, say, 100 years or more, and things have got them to here, but as you said, things are about to start breaking if they haven't already.
Yeah. It's I think it's often where you do see these little skunk work teams pop up where, they'll hire a creative space somewhere away from the mothership of the 100-year-old head office and put some people over in Surrey Hills, and I'll give them a coffee machine and a beer fridge and let them go wild, because you're trying to break the cultural norms and the process around the cultural norms that says, no, we don't do that. Like there's this great experiment that was done, if I can remember the details of it, which basically leads to the outcome of how things are done around here, and that's part of the culturally ingrained behaviour. So it was monkeys in a cage. There was bananas at the top of a ramp, and all the monkeys had to do was go up the ramp, and they could have the bananas. And the first time the first 3 monkeys went up the ramp, they got hit by a jet of water that stopped them. And so over a course of being sprayed with water a few times, the monkeys stopped going up the ramp. One monkey's taken out, a new monkey's put in. The new monkey's never seen the spray of water, goes up the ramp to get the bananas. The 2 monkeys that are in the cage stop the monkey going up the ramp. Then they repeat this experiment until all 3 monkeys in the cage have never seen the jet of water, and none of them go up the ramp, because the way we do it around here is, if you go up the ramp, you'll be sprayed with water. And so that is how organizations become ingrained with behaviors that stop that progress. And so the break of that is to then go, well, if that's the way it's done around here, create an environment that's completely different, that creates the freedom to experiment. And that's when you see these little pop-up units that try and emulate a Google, Spotify, a startup culture. Because the startup culture was built with that experimentation, because it had to experiment to survive, because often the things you do first are not the things that are going to be successful. Whereas in the 100-year-old organization, this is the way it's done. This is how we write policy. This is how we behave. This is how we dress to come to work. This is what an office looks like. And they create that pattern. And when someone tries to go up the ramp to get the bananas, everyone grabs them by the trouser leg and pulls them back down and goes, no, you don't do that, because you're going to get sprayed by water that doesn't exist anymore.
And it reminds me, Robin Sharma used to talk about, you look at those companies that were at one time the best in the world, and then they sort of, whether it's believing their own rhetoric or, the culture becomes, just as you were explaining, that they start to then go into decline because they literally they stop experimenting. They just go, people should come to us because we've been around for however many years, or, we're the best in the world.
Yeah.
So what do you think is that shift in the culture that takes us from that startup? How do we maintain that through, whether it's size change, we become best in the world, etc.? How do we keep that experimentation culture as organizations get older, more successful? What do you reckon we could do there?
I think there's a risk appetite. I think risk appetite changes. I think when you're a startup, you have an inbuilt risk appetite. You start with boom or bust. Is this going to, it is a bet. You don't know if it's going to work or not. And then as things become successful, you become protective of the successful things. And so you start to, you have an inbuilt, you move away from needing the risk appetite because things are working, and then you become protective of the things that work. So I think it comes back to, it's a leadership culture, which is it's okay to fail, but have some controls in place. So what can we experiment? What product can we launch on the fringe? We're not going to take our core product. Let's just take a consumer packaged goods product to take our lovely washing powder in a color we recognize, and we're going to change it into a completely different format and put it on a completely different shelf and not stock it in two of the major retailers just because. That would be dumb. But you could create a variant of that, and you could put that into an independent grocer and see how that sells. And so this fringe experimentation culture creates, and again, this is where often you see the little skunk works and the experimentation departments, and you also see the large companies buying the small companies. So we've seen this in the packaged goods industries, the Unilevers, P&Gs buying the direct-to-consumer companies, Dollar Shave Club, etc. But then what you see is that the big culture eats the little culture. So and I've been part of a company that was bought for its culture by a company that didn't have the culture of the company they bought, and they killed the culture. And so it happens quite a lot in that we see something that we don't have, so we buy something that has what we want, but we can't let that survive in the organization we've built. And so I think if you trace that, it goes to a leadership culture which is risk averse, settled, possibly with tenure in that organization. And so you look at that board structure, C-suite structure, and there probably needs to be some disruption where, again, you've probably got some very comfortable relationships between board, chairman, CEO. It's all feeling lovely, but in 5 years' time may not exist.
Great answer. So, Fisher, we're nearly at the end of our conversation, but I'm curious, is there anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners and our viewers?
The one I can't not talk about is how this starts to play out for us, I guess, because it's my space that I'm heavily engaged in at the moment. So this mindset of experimentation and testing what's true and what's not is actually how we build a secure sense of self, and it's how we get to a strong leadership identity. And the reason I bring this up is I don't think this has ever been more important. And so we can talk about organizational risk and we can talk about culture, but how we learn who and what we trust, and really the really big question underneath that is, am I safe here, comes from how we as individuals test the water. When we share that personal story in all hands, am I met with silence or curiosity? Does the saber-toothed tiger leap out of the bushes and eat me? If I shift my focus from the value being about me and my role title to being about the team, do I feel more or less valued? These are the things we test. Like, these are little experiments that we used to do really regularly. And now digital has hijacked our need to find social validation because we're getting it through digital validation. And as a result, we're starting to lose the edges of how we build a distinctive personal brand, how we show up in the workplace, how we build our leadership identity. And so the threats that exist still existed. So judgment, exclusion, rejection. We used to just do little experiments that we now don't do as much. And this is, I think it's a massive risk for every leader who doesn't experiment with how they're showing up every day. We get stuck. We get armor that protects us. And we feel less authentic, we're harder to relate to, we're harder to get to know, we're harder to trust. And they're not great attributes for anyone who wants to lead wherever they are in the organization. And so playing with this as a person, like playing with everything we've talked about, but at a personal level, that's how we shape a healthy sense of self, how we develop a healthy leadership brand, how we build our presence both in the workplace, but also out into the market. And so I think, yeah, if you take that, then go back and listen to this again from the beginning. Everything we've talked about for organizations and for leaders applies to us as individuals if we want to build healthy connections and relationships.
So, Fishy, I reckon there'll be some listeners and viewers who'd love to reach out to you. So where's the best places for them to do that?
Two really easy ones. Email is fish@davidfish.com.au, and the website is the same, davidfish.com.au, and I'm on LinkedIn under David Fishy, or David Fish /Fishy. I think it is on LinkedIn, but if you have a look for my beady face, you'll find me on LinkedIn.
And we'll make sure that we include those in the podcast descriptions as well so people can reach out. Thanks so much, Fishy. I love that. And what a beautiful way to finish the podcast. Fishy, thank you so much for joining us today. And to all of our listeners and our viewers, stay adaptable.
Well, Danette, what a great conversation with Fishy. It's always a pleasure to hear you guys chat. What were your big takeaways from that interview?
So I loved his thing about comfort and, we should always be experimenting. I also really liked the thing that we're never finished. In business, if you think you're finished, you've stopped experimenting, and that really means you're going to start falling behind. So I really liked his takeaway of get nervous if you're feeling comfortable, because it really is that insight that as the world changes, we need to be experimenting to stay up to date. And I liked how we talked about that stretch vision. So we create a vision where we have no idea how we're going to get there. And then we simply ask questions and experiment in order to create the path to get there. So, our brain loves certainty, and yet where we're headed is totally uncertain. So we have to get used to that discomfort of not knowing, and then working together through asking questions, experimenting, getting feedback, iterating, and continuing to move forward. So there was just some fabulous insights and advice from this discussion with Fishy.
Yeah, I totally agree. And honestly, the thing that I thought was perhaps the most interesting, other than the 70-20-10 part, which I thought was really fascinating, was when his idea around how comfort is the signal to experiment. Like once you start
Yes.
feeling comfortable, all right, now we've got a solid base. Let's go into experimentation, because exactly what you say, if you're not experimenting, it's almost like there's a bit of a stream pushing you backwards. Like you have to be swimming a little bit forward to sort of
Yes.
go forward. So yeah, no, great conversation as always. And it's always a pleasure to chat to David Fishy Fish.
Yes.
Well, Danette, speaking of asking questions, we've got our final listener segment for this season, Ask and Adapt. Alrighty, everybody, welcome to the final Ask and Adapt for Season 3 of Adapt with Danette FM. And Ask and Adapt is a segment where the listeners can write in either at adaptwithdanette@gmail.com, or on Spotify and YouTube you can leave a comment, and we'll hopefully get to that in a future episode. But they can ask you a question about adaptability, this season experimentation. But you know what? If you want to ask a question about experimentation next season, I won't hold it against you.
No.
So, Danette, this week's email, and our final one from the season, is from Tina. And Tina's written in, Danette, and I think it's a pertinent one. It's a great one to leave our audience with, because I'm sure a lot of them are thinking the same thing. So I was actually very thankful that Tina wrote this one in. And it says, "Hi, Danette, loving the season so far. My question is about experimenting and staying adaptable in a world that is feeling all over the shop. How are you finding ways to experiment in these times? All the best, Tina."
Awesome. Great question, Tina. And can I say, given it is the last episode of the season, thank you to all the listeners and viewers that have actually asked questions, because there's been some awesome questions. For me, part of what leads me to want to experiment is basically creating space first. After whether it's I've read something, I've watched something, maybe I've had a conversation, and sometimes it can be with a complete stranger, or I've listened to something that's just sparked an idea in my head. Because I'm always thinking, how do we continuously learn and grow in our business? And so that then inspires me to think of little things to do, but also new things. And, for example, obviously AI is a thing at the moment, thinking about how I can use that as a tool to help improve our level of what we do for our customers, but bring our originality with it as well. So it's like a tool to support, and continuously pushing myself to learn and grow and experiment, and also give my team permission to learn and grow and experiment as well.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, as we said in the last episode, this whole experimentation is not a one-person game. It's the more you get everyone involved, make it safe to collaborate with one another, make it safe to try things. If they fail, we just learn, we iterate from that. Doesn't mean it's wasted effort. And I think just knowing that the world will continuously change, and adapting, having that adaptable, open mindset of this may not work, it might work, that's okay, because it'll help us continue to learn and grow. And I really liked Fishy's 70-20-10, and particularly, at the 10%, we're not betting the entire company, and we are continuously investing in how do we do this better. And, using the podcast, we literally started out with me on an iPhone with my earbuds in and the speaker off those. And it was back in the days where you plugged in your earbuds to where we are today. We've tried different platforms, etc. And podcasts have moved over that time. So they were primarily audio. Obviously now primarily a lot of people watch them rather than listen to them. So, I love, Jez, your expertise around podcasts and you bringing those ideas of let's experiment with this thing to continuously improve those podcasts. And, obviously we've got other team members that they continue to experiment in their particular areas as well. And I think for all organisations, being open to the fact that if we are the same this year as we were last year, there's stuff we're probably leaving on the table, which, couldn't ultimately not be for our benefit.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Danette, there's so many good points in there. And I think, change is inevitable. So,
Yes.
Are you going to change or not? I think is kind of, an important part of that. But, you've reminded me of a lot of things here, Danette. Part of it is the idea that there's a sort of meme that goes around, a TikTok sound that goes around that you hear once in a while that's quite funny that says, I am once again horrified to learn that the process of trial and error involves error. Which I think is an important way for us to think about it.
Love
But we all have to remember that is an important part of it. And I think that, when times are chaotic, it actually makes experimentation more useful. Like I'll share a tip that maybe not a lot of listeners will know, but it sort of speaks to the concept of how experimentation is being used by younger generations is, Danette, have you heard of the concept of clip farming? Does that mean anything to you?
No,
Okay,
tell me
great,
more.
great. No, so this is good. So clip farming is this concept that maybe I'd take a podcast like the one that we're watching or listening to right now, and instead of taking maybe one or two social media clips, I might take about 15, okay, from
Yes.
this podcast. So I split
Yeah.
this into a bunch of different little
Right.
clips. I pop them all up online at the same time. And what I've done is I've farmed the podcast for clips. I've farmed it for that's where the title comes from. And what you do is you pop them all up and you see which one works because you don't know which one's going to work. The idea is that there's going to be a lot of failure here. You're really looking for one to stick out of 15.
Very nice.
Then what they do is they have that one, they see that one successful. They, they monetize that one. They sort of make that one sort of the big one. And then they just remove the other ones. And so when you return to this page in 2 weeks, all those other clips that didn't do well are gone. But when you look at their page, it's 1 million views, 2 million views, all this stuff, because what they've done is they've understood that to get success, you have to have a lot of failure. And that's a whole industry in of itself now. So that's a good one for our, for people that don't know what clip farming is, a little bit of a sort of younger technique that's all about, sort of utilizing failure. And the other thing that I wanted to say is I think that being comfortable and safe really is the best option when the world is comfortable and safe. But when things are changing, being comfortable and safe can be almost a bad idea. Like I think we all know the classic example of Kodak. They thought they were comfortable and safe and the world moved and they didn't. And so, that was the comfortable and safe option, was to not do anything. And, so I think experimentation, when things are changing, that's the best time to experiment. And as we know, unfortunately, trial and error, unfortunately, involves error. So Danette, we've got to the end of the 3rd season of Experimentation. We had a lot of great interviews, a lot of great guests. We want to thank the guests as well for contributing to an awesome season. I just wanted to ask, did you have any final takeaways from the season as a whole this year?
So I reckon every day we have opportunity to experiment, whether it's learning new stuff, having new conversations with different people, seeking input from different generations. So we're getting those different perspectives. And, that error bit, I call them mistakes. And I call them mistakes to make myself laugh when I make a mistake. And know that that's just part of learning and growing. And in fact, the faster you make them, so that fail fast that we've heard, actually allows you to move forward and iterate faster. So don't be scared to be uncomfortable. Don't be scared to make a mistake, because ultimately that helps you adapt in a world where we need to continuously adapt. And most important, look after yourself, because when you've got high resilience, it is way easier to adapt and experiment. So Jez, what about you? Any final takeaways from your perspective?
Well, I mean, I think that the big one for me was just how, no matter what industry our guest was in, be it a comedy writer through to someone, dealing with multi-million dollar and billion-dollar kind of investments,
Yeah.
experimentation is a crucial part of everything. And it's an important part of staying adaptable. And, every single conversation talked about changes in their industry. And so they had to stay adaptable. And
Yes.
experimentation was often a huge part of that. So I think the big takeaway from me is that everyone can be experimental and everyone can be adaptable. And if you aren't, then maybe that's a warning sign. As Fishy said, as maybe the comfort is a warning sign to experiment.
I love it. Well, Jess, can
Oh,
I say thank you so much for joining me again on this season. It's been a fabulous season full of great conversations around experimenting. And I'd really like to thank all of our listeners and viewers who've been listening, watching, and also sharing our episodes with others. And until next season, everyone, stay adaptable.